sure to join us in 2 weeks for that. And today we are thrilled to have with us Chris and Christian from Dell. I'm sure everyone's working remotely these days, so they're going to help us work out all the issues that we may be facing with security and server, and how to best set up our office for remote work.
Yeah, so thank you all, and I appreciate y'all's time. Like I said, my name is Christian Mims. I am the account executive with BSA and the AIA as a whole, and I primarily handle the partnership and the relationship between the two organizations. That way we can actively provide y'all education content such as this, as well as some discounts that we're able to exclusively offer y'all as well. And with that, I'm gonna let my coworker here, Chris Jones, kind of take the floor, as he's going to be talking a little bit more about the security side. Chris, I don't think we can hear you there.
How about that?
There we go.
Okay. I get killed by the double mute all the time on these things. Let me share this out. All right, so you should be able to see my screen, the remote threats, insider risk, and the remote work paradigm. Okay, awesome. So I really appreciate Christian and your organization having me today. We're going to take a few minutes to talk about a topic that's near and dear to my heart, which is the insider risk problem, and then also we'll move into a little bit about the remote work paradigm, and hopefully in both of those, I'm going to challenge you in your business of how are you protecting your intellectual property? How are you protecting your people? How are you handling these issues as they come up within your workforce? And I understand most of you will be a small to medium-sized business, and maybe a very small business of just sole practitioners up to a couple of employees. Everything that we talk about today applies. Unless you're a sole proprietor and you are your biggest threat to yourself, then you've got employees and you've got risk and problems that you need to be thinking about how you're handling your intellectual property, your drawings, CAD designs, engineering information, all these things that are proprietary that make you for your organization need to be protected. So I've been involved in addressing the insider risk problem set for many, many years now. I've spent years inside of the U.S. government, both the intelligence community and the FBI, kind of utilizing my talents in both psychological behavioral analysis and pattern of life studies, and pulling that all together into a cyber problem set. And how are we dealing with this from technology standpoint? Because everything is moving to technology. How are we protecting ourselves? And hopefully today I'm going to give you some great strategies for you to think about how to better protect your business. At the end, we'll have some time for questions and answers. And I think between Christian and myself, we should be able to hopefully answer most anything. And if I can't answer it, I'll find out, and I will pass the information back to the leadership of the organization, and we can hopefully get you the answers that you need. So let's jump right in here. So we discovered in our research, and this is a quote from Dr. Larry Poniman, and most of y'all probably don't know who the Poniman Institute is, or Dr. Poniman. This is one of the largest research organizations dealing with cyber threats and breaches and those kind of things. And they found that in their research that the insider threats are not viewed as seriously as like an external cyber attack. You hear all the time about APTs, advanced persistent threat, all the nation state activities and people hacking into your computer and all the hacktivist groups doing all these things. And that gets all the big attention in the news because it's an external threat that's threatening your organization. And they're trying to get in there and to monetize information that you have, either by locking it up in some type of encryption and forcing you to pay a ransom, or potentially stealing information from you externally to use against you later. What we're talking about today are the inside threats. This is your employees, it's potentially you, and other holes that you have. And what he found was that when companies had an insider threat, in general, they're much more costly than the external incidents. And this is because the insider that's in your company is smart. They have the skills to hide their crime for a long period of time. It says months and years and sometimes forever, because they're trusted. They have access. And so they have the time, ability to do things to harm your organization that you may not be aware of for a very long time. Let's talk about what an insider risk is. So for the purpose of our conversation, it's basically an insider threat or an insider risk is a person who is a trusted team member, past or present, meaning, so it could be a former employee, who is an employee, a contractor, or has some form of legitimate access to your system or facilities. And due to some stressor or motivation or negligence even, they perform some action that causes damage or compromises valuable information. So it's anyone who has access to your facilities. And sometimes this can include your customers. So anyone who has access to your computer networks, your facilities, your workspace that you're in, working at home, sometimes it's your kids, especially if you have little kids that wander in. I mean, who knows what they're going to do to your systems or stick into the USB ports and those kind of things. A little different about what we're talking about today, but those are things that are going on today that I'm hearing about. So we're going to go, now that we've kind of normalized what an insider risk is, we're really talking about team members, past team members that are no longer there, and current team members, and potentially customers and other people with access to your organization. We typically see insider threats coming in three basic categories. These are malicious insiders and these are the people who take advantage of their access to inflict harm intentionally and purposefully on an organization. This is the lowest percentage of the insider risk that we see, but when they happen, they're very, very costly. In my personal work experience, this tends to account for maybe less than 1% to 2% of the risk and threats that we investigate are actually hardcore malicious intent, criminal intent. Most people fall into the next category, which is the negligent insider. These are people who make errors. They disregard the policies which place their organizations at risk. These are the people that click on all the emails that come in that promise them riches from faraway lands or pictures of their favorite celebrity or whatever it is. These are the people that click on all the links that come in. Or even respond to some of the pop-up windows that say, hey, your computer's infected. Click here and we'll clean it for you. You've got a big problem. None of those are legitimate, and we have people, even within the technology organizations, will fall for those. That tends to make the bulk of what we see. The third group are the infiltrators, and these are the external actors that obtain legitimate access credentials without authorization. These can be people that are like coming in using a false pretense or a pretext to get a job at your company, to gather information internally. And these are very dangerous. And this is why we have to have access controls around your information. These are people who've come in there intending to work for your company and take information from you. So what causes a person to actually become an insider threat, from a risk to a threat? There are some basic stressors and triggers that we see in most every indication. And we'll talk about the stressors and triggers, and we'll talk about kind of the behavioral typologies that are there. And then we'll go through some of the indicators of what we look for in both technology, but also in our human personal interactions. The first one is unmet expectations. This is someone is going to be stressed or triggered because they feel like that they're owed something. They've worked hard on this project. They've gone over and above or extended themselves out, and they felt like they needed that recognition for some reason. and or that they deserve that promotion that they've been working for so long, and they didn't get that. So that's an unmet expectation. Next up, everybody comes in with personal predisposition and bias, no matter what that is. And you likely don't know what those is against a people group, an organization, or some other type of predispositions of thought of how they think through problems that you don't see until it's too late. The next up is an entitlement mentality. We'll talk about this again in a few minutes, but the entitlement mentality is someone who feels like they are just the king of the hill. They're the best at what they do, and that you need to bow down to them and provide them all the kudos and recognition that you can get, because they just inherently deserve it. It's not that they've done anything. They just themselves believe they're worth it, and they want that recognition. Another stressor and trigger that is very sad is the substance abuse piece of it. Substance abuse, whether alcohol or illegal drugs, or even prescription drugs that have turned into a habit-forming situation, can cause people to make decisions and do things that are way out of character for who they are as a person. So substance abuse issues can drive people to do things that they would have never done in their sober state, and it's not a part of their core character of who they are. It's a very sad situation to deal with when these come up. The next one is money issues. And when dealing with money issues, those of us that are professional investigators, we look at this from what's called the fraud triangle. And the fraud triangle consists of three areas that I've put up here: the pressure, the opportunity, and the rationalization. So number one, the pressure. There's some external pressure coming down on this person that says, I'm feeling this. I've got medical bills coming in. My car's being repossessed. My house is being foreclosed on, or I'm being evicted. They've got some pressure that is coming down on them, and they don't know what to do. And they feel like they're within a rock and a hard place. Well, next up, on top of pressure, do they have opportunity? Meaning, do they have a corporate credit card? Do they have access to your corporate checking accounts and other financial accounts that you have? Do they have the opportunity to manipulate those funds in some way, moving them around, or writing checks, or using the corporate card where it's not really reconciled regularly? And finally, rationalization. This is when they're like, you know what, the company doesn't want my car to get repossessed because I won't be able to come into work, or I won't be able to go to this job site. So, you know what, they don't want that. And I'm just going to do this one time, and I'm going to pay it back. And they have every, intent in their mind. They've rationalized it out that they've got this pressure. They've got the opportunity to use some financial resource, and then they can rationalize it out in their mind because they feel like the company wouldn't want this to happen to them. So that's the fraud triangle, and kind of the basic triggers that we see in most cases. Now let's talk about the motivations. Now, everybody's heard about the behavioral profilers, like the FBI and other organizations like that. I've been trained in behavioral motivations and profiling techniques through university and through other government organizations. And generally, we work through the following behavioral motivational typologies. So the first one is called the power reassurance, or the compensatory model. So the person that's kind of motivated through power reassurance, they're intended to restore the offender's self-confidence or self-worth through low aggressive means. And this may mean apologies. They reassure their victims that everything's going to be okay if it's a violent situation. They're trying to show concern for their victim. And many times they need emotional feedback from their victim to say, are you okay? I'm very sorry about doing this. And they're trying to solicit things back from their victims to make them feel better about what they're doing. But their whole purpose is to try to regain their self-confidence and their self-worth. And it's very low aggressive means, but this is hallmarked by the apologies. I'm sorry that I'm doing this. Are you okay? Are you comfortable? I'm sorry I took all this money. It wasn't my intent to hurt anybody. The next one is the power assertive model. The power assertive driven actions are intended to restore self-confidence and self-worth through the use of moderate to highly aggressive means and violence. This is characterized by the driving motivation for power and dominance. So they're coming in to take control of the situation, and they're trying to get their self-confidence and self-worth back through asserting their control and dominance over their victims. The next up is the anger retaliatory. These are the people that are indicate a great deal of rage toward a specific group, institution, or symbol, and it's a very violent reaction, and it's characterized by the driving motivation for power and absolute dominance. They're not trying to build self-worth back. They're trying to have an outlet for their rage and anger that they have. The next one is the sadistic, or the anger excitation. And the sadistic driven actions offer gratification to the offender from the pain that they're inflicting. Their sole purpose in inflicting pain is for the gratification from inflicting it. They're not so much driven by their anger towards someone. They're not trying to build their self-worth up. They're gaining their gratification from just inflicting the pain and violence on someone. The last one was profit, material gain. So, these are people that are solely driven by money. They need the money for some reason. And that's their base type motivational thing, is some type of compensation to them. Now, what does this mean to you? The chances are, if you're hearing this presentation, you're not planning to spend the millions and millions of dollars that many companies are spending today to set up insider risk programs and early warning programs, workplace violence issues and things like that. But there's one thing that you have that many companies don't have, and that's a smaller span of control. You still have access to your employees, and you may know them personally, or maybe your company's getting a little bigger and you don't know everyone that you used to. That's okay. It doesn't change the fact that through all the predictive analytics, through all the technology spins, all these systems and AI and machine learning have yet to overtake the value of the relationship that you have with your employees and knowing your employees. One of the most important things is to build an environment where your coworkers, your HR people, the managers, they are all in a position to notice something isn't right with someone, the behavior doesn't make sense, and that some comments that your employee's saying may be concerning, something is odd and just doesn't feel right. It's important to create an environment where those people feel empowered and have an outlet to come and talk to someone that, hey, so-and-so is not doing well. This is going on in their life and I'm concerned about them. And it's important from that point forward to remember your humanity and to treat them like a person, and to not just use a checklist approach. It's important to have a plan, but remember you're dealing with a human being and they need empathy and compassion. And you as an employer are in a great position to do that and to help them through that. And if you're able to invest a little in them and to help them addressing their problems, that is a lot cheaper than cleaning up a massive fraud or a massive workplace incident later, because you just took the time to show some humanity to someone. Treating people like human beings and listening to them will do more to diffuse the problems that we're talking about today than anything else I know about. People like to be treated like human beings and be treated with respect. You need to look at how, if you end up having to separate from them, you need to look at how are you exiting them from your company so they have a soft landing and feel supported, especially if they're having problems in their life and maybe they've done something to cross the line. Doesn't mean you need to keep them in your company, but it behooves you in the long run to try to make sure that they have a soft exit as they can. And what are some of the indicators that we look for as professionals? So we tend to look for declining work performance, declining hygiene and dress. So somebody just looks like they haven't showered in a while or just look disheveled. People will start mentioning interviews with competitors and start overly talking about competitors and competitor products and projects and things that they've seen going on, and talking about how, you know, their current company is just not up to snuff and not doing the great things that the competitor is doing. Indication of money problems. People overhearing collectors calling them on their cell phone, and you know, dealing with evictions or repossessions and those kind of things. Or the flip side of that is sudden affluence, where someone that's maybe working at your company that's making $30,000 a year and supposedly lives by themselves in a small studio apartment suddenly ends up with a Tesla or some new car, or their dress, and everything starts, you know, showing more affluence than they normally had before, but there's no reason for it. You're not aware of them, you know, getting married or having a significant other that has more money or something to that nature. And the last one is unapproved or unexplained changes in work hours, coming in late and leaving early, just doing odd things around the office, going into odd areas at odd times. Now, this is not an exhaustive list, and any one of these on their own is not necessarily a problem. And what we look for is like a cloud of indications. 1, 2, 3 of these things may not be a problem. You may be looking at a couple of these yourselves and thinking, well, I'm going through that now, and it doesn't mean I'm a threat or I'm not planning on doing anything. And that's generally true of most people. But what we look for are like clouds of indication. So that's what I'm trying to represent here, to kind of show that there's, you know, is there open hostility toward leadership? Are they unusually accessing their technology and putting things on USB drives or other external storage? Do your computer systems just suddenly start acting weird, more weird than normal? It could be a dry run by someone on your technology staff that's about to set off some type of a logic bomb because they've been passed over for a promotion, or know that something is coming because they're reading people's emails and know there might be about the layoff or something coming. So any of these things, we look for a cloud of indicators of, you know, 3, 5, 7 to 9 of these things come together, and maybe it's time to sit down and have a conversation with an employee, find out what's going on, see if you can help them, and just do a quick touch base with them, see if there's something you can help them with. Like I said, any 1 or 2 or 3 of these on their own is not a big deal. And even if someone exhibits a lot of these things at one time, it's not necessarily saying that they're doing something wrong, but it is time to do a touch base and validate what's going on in their life, and also validate what information and what are they doing around the office and what are they accessing. And it's time to ask questions, because you do have to protect your intellectual property. Now, with that, on top of those cloud of indications, things have gotten complicated because we've got a mass shift to remote work. In a study published in 2019, only about 3.6% of Americans worked at home full time. And as we know now, that's not the case. You know, primarily 90% of America right now is working from home. And even as restrictions start to be lifted in many areas, a lot of companies are still asking their employees to stay remote, and they're trying to figure out a way to change their operations so they can support this remote workforce. So there's some things there that come with those changes. In addition to those cloud of indicators, you've got a lot of technology problems to solve. VPN, virtual private networks. How are your employees at home going to access your networks back at the office? Can your VPN volume and use, can your infrastructure even handle this increase? This was a big question that we wrestled with at Dell when we pushed the primary bulk of our workforce to remote, and we had a pretty massive infrastructure, but we had to bulk it up, and luckily we had the foresight within our cybersecurity team to see that this may be a potentiality of remote work early on back in January, and we started working pretty soon to start increasing our VPN infrastructure to be able to handle the increased demand. Dell on its own is a very remote company and has been long pushing to have more remoteness within our workforce. So we were able to handle that, but many companies were not prepared for it because they're primarily come into the office, be seen, be in the seat. Next up, you've got to watch your change in levels of user permissions. The zero trust, least privilege models don't work as easily when you're in a remote work situation. There's a higher likelihood of data exfiltration, both benign and malicious. People are sitting at home, they need to go print something or they need to move something to another system. So data is going to start getting pulled off the system for some reason because it's just easier to do it there because they're not at the office. There's always employment uncertainty in this. People just don't know what's going on. They're worried about their future because no one knows what's going to be happening. How's the economy going to rebound? How is that going to affect my work schedule? And my working hours going to change? Am I being impacted because now being at home, I'm on Zoom meetings constantly, 8 to 10 hours a day, because that gets exhausting. And there's the more need for cloud services, software as a service, and both cloud storage. And is your HR activities, such as training and oversight and your hiring and terminations, have you adopted those? These are critical areas that you have to work within. With those changes, there's a lot of external risks that are there more. You've got credential intercept due to higher volumes of logins from outside the office. People may not be using their VPNs. There's a higher frequency in phishing attempts. Those have been very targeted for the remote workforce lately, and some of them have been very successful. There's many more opportunities in general for cyber attacks. Now, how are we going to mitigate these things? The first thing is training. You've got to have expectations of your workforce, and you need to communicate these things to your workforce. You know your business, you know how they're supposed to be accessing it, and training is key to make sure people are all on the same page. If you can utilize endpoint insights, if you can collect information from their desktop and laptop computers through logs or some other information to have your technology team reviewing these things, that's going to help build a bigger picture for you. Constantly assessing and incrementing your SOPs, third-party evaluation of your existing security infrastructure. And I would also recommend regular randomized testing of your employees. And that can assist in identifying those who may require additional training. There are companies that will help you do this by doing targeted, secure phishing emails, simulated phishing emails against your workforce to see who will click on what. And if they click on something, it takes them to a training page. And that may help you reduce your risk level for people to start looking for these things as they come in. Now, I've got 8 key takeaways. These are the things that you can do now to go back and think about with your company and your board and your leadership. Number 1, the most important thing is to know who you're hiring. This includes background checks, criminal checks, credit checks, professional licensing checks, and to validate their skills. Even if you're hiring someone, even if you know this person personally, I highly recommend that you perform the background checks, the criminal checks, the credit checks, and absolutely the professional license check if it's required in their job class that you're hiring them into, and ask them to perform some things to validate their skills. You just don't know what's going on in their life. And so it's good to know who you're bringing into the organization. Just because someone may have some type of criminal background doesn't invalidate their opportunity for the position. But if they have some type of a fraud conviction in the background, maybe handling some type of money situation is not the right thing to do in your company. Next, bake a culture of security into your company. You need to be explicit and serious, document handling procedures for information, and follow them yourself. If you're not leading the charge for security and leading by example, no one else is going to follow you. This is critical. Security should become a part of how you're handling things. It doesn't have to be overburdened, but make sure people are following password protections properly. Make sure people are saving information into the right stores, that they're labeling them properly. And we'll talk about that in just a moment here. And you've got to follow those things yourself, and you've got to be an example to your workforce. The next one is to know and protect your crown jewels. This is the secret sauce that makes your company. What is that? Is it your client list? Is it your drawings? Is it engineering information? What is it that makes your organization and who you are different than other people? So what are those? you need to mark those things confidential, proprietary information. You've got to label those on the documents themselves. The courts will have looked at these things in the past from other organizations that have experienced loss. And if you're not taking steps to secure them in shared drives that are restricted, so only the people that need access to it, and if you're not marking those documents to say, hey, these are really important, these are our crown jewels, this is critical information, you could potentially, lose control of that IP, because the courts will say, hey, you weren't taking steps to control it. It was available to everyone. It wasn't even marked as proprietary or anything. And there's been instances where there's been some very serious court rulings against companies that have not taken those steps. Number 4, let people be human. It's okay to have and express emotion and frustration. It's okay to have and express compassion, and you should engage your employees with help wherever possible. Like I said before, this is the cheapest way to address a problem, is to get out in front of it before it occurs and before it becomes costly to you, potentially more costly than you would even be able to recover from. It's okay for people to be human. It's okay for you to express compassion to them. Next, no one should be the only. I realize this is not necessarily true in a sole proprietorship, but no one should be the only person who knows this piece of information. No one should be the only one who can do that. No one should be the only person that has this password or the administrator password, or no one should ever be the only person who can make decisions. You need to expand those out so multiple people have that information, so there's no one critical point of failure. Those choke points are what bring companies down, especially smaller companies. When you lose that password, or the only person that knows this and now they're gone. You don't want to be in that situation. Next is to back up your data, local, online, and continuous, offsite and nearline. What I mean is, you should have a local backup that's continuous on your network, so it's easy to recover. If something gets deleted, you can get to it. But you should also be doing periodic offsite and nearline backup, something that's not connected to your network. So if you get hit by some of the encryption ransomware that's out there, you've got a place to go to pull data up, so you're not just have lost everything. And last up, you need to test your backup plan regularly. This is critical. If you've got a backup scheme in place, make sure your technology team is testing it. Ask them and quiz them about this. Are you backing up, and are you testing the recovery from that? If something were to go wrong, what are your steps? Number 7, manage risk by asking, what if this happened? This is where you sit with your leadership and talk about what are the top viable risks that we are facing as a company, and then how are we going to address them? So this is coming up with your top 5 or 7 or 10 things that could potentially actually happen, and come up with a written plan of how to do that, how to address that issue when it happens. This is a risk assessment, risk management process. This is very critical to do. If you've got the only piece of machinery in the world that makes this particular product or does this process, and it's sitting in a warehouse that's in a flood zone or potentially in an earthquake zone, what happens when that thing gets damaged by flooding or earthquake or even fire or tornado? What are you doing to protect that? And what are you going to do to recover from it when that piece of machinery goes away? This is a great exercise to do with your leadership, and to talk about what are the top viable risks that you face and how are you going to address those. And last, so you need to empower someone to lead protection. Someone actually needs to own it within your organization. You should be leaning on your board, if you have one, to validate your approaches. The reason you have the board is to have multiple views and opinions and experiences. Lean on them and ask them, what are you doing there? What are you doing in your organization? And talk to them about, do you think this is being effective? And you may have insurance or regulatory requirements. You want to make sure that you're meeting. Those are 8 key takeaways that should be considered. You should be working through those things, and that will do a lot to help protect your company. Now, for some resources for you to look up. There are 2 books: The Insider Threat Program, Your 90-Day Plan by Sean Thompson, and The CERT Guide to Insider Threats. This is put up by Carnegie Mellon, by Don Capelli, Andrew Moore, and Randall. These are probably 2 of the best books that I've seen in the years that I've been doing this work. The Insider Threat Program 90-Day Plan is a small booklet. It's basically a very distilled kind of Cliff Notes kind of thing, Spark Notes thing that's here's the basics of what you need to do to get a program in place. It's very clear and concise and easy to follow. The CERT Guide to Insider Threats is going to give you the case studies and the data and the backup that you need to kind of make decisions of where things are going on in technology, and to give you case studies to help back up your decisions and actions that you're taking. One question that I started getting a lot of was, where can I go to get low to no cost cybersecurity training for my employees? The NICE, the National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education, if you go to the NIST website, which is nist.gov, you can do a search for NICE, and they have a list there for online learning content that they have multiple resources for workforce training that's low cost, more intensive cybersecurity training, and it's a great resource for these things. So I highly recommend going to take a look at that. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Christian, and I think we can open up for questions.
Yep. Thank you, Chris. Were there any questions that anyone had for Chris? If you'd like, you can put them up in the chat as well. I will take the silences. No one had any questions there. Oh, I think Catherine had one.
Catherine, you might be muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. I did have one question about sort of insurance against insider threats. And maybe that's something I need to talk with our insurance agent about. But I was just wondering whether there is any sort of like insurance or like financial protection that you can get in addition to thinking about the sort of psychological profiles, et cetera. That would be helpful.
Sure. So I'm not an insurance agent, but
of course, yeah.
So I can tell you, I know that there are companies. This is somewhat of a relatively new field for them, but they have cybersecurity insurance for computer breaches, technology breaches, those types of things. So I would recommend talking with the companies that offer those types of planning. Their limits tend to be, I think, around 10 million was the last I heard was the top end for those. But that may have changed. That's been like a year since I've heard that figure was the limit top. Okay. But that would cover a lot of those things. But it's a good question to go back to your insurance agent to discuss, because some of these things are really more fall into kind of the fraud and theft and those types of things. But because of the technology nexus, there may be, depending on how the policy is written, there may be a claim to be made from that.
Okay. Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, that was a great question, Catherine. Thank you. Anyone else have any questions there? No? Okay. Well, if anyone else has any other questions that come up that you think about, feel free to put them in the chat there and we can address them. But with that, Chris, I do thank you for your time. And everyone, I'm going to go ahead and kind of transition over into our next conversation that I wanted to have with y'all, which was primarily about how to empower your business and protecting your own data with a server. I know when a lot of businesses, even if you are a sole proprietorship, or small to medium-sized business, when you think of a server, in some cases it might be scary because it's it's not a desktop or a laptop. It's something that is in the cloud that you hear about on the TV or on the news, and or even if you are somewhat familiar about a server, just the actual process of maintaining and setting one up can be very daunting. Um, I know from a kind of nitty gritty, very low level aspect from a server, what a server is. It's really an additional computer or device that within your business's network is going to either house or run a specific application. It could store all of your data. What they really allow you for is a more efficient workflow. So instead of having everything on a single system where it resides, where you have to go to that one system to do that application or to pull that data from, it can be in a centralized device, which all of that in turn is going to allow your staff to be more productive, and it's going to make it to where it's more secure as well. The big thing with the server is that it can be the most critical investment to your business that can move your business to the next level. Whenever you are looking at a server or thinking about a server, you really want to look for the 4 key things, in my opinion, which are the scalability, the reliability, your availability, and your service and support. Those 4 things can really help make or break a server, in my opinion. And to really kind of touch on scalability a little bit, that is going from, instead of having a system that can handle your workforce, your workload as it is right now, but getting a system that not only can handle it now, but can handle it into the future, 5, 8, 10 years down the road. Because, how many times have you bought a computer or a laptop or a desktop and you've only just used it for a year, and then the next year you go out and buy a new one? It's very, very rare that you're doing that. The server is the same way with that. You want to have that scalability where either you can add in more hard drives to it or add in more RAM, whatever it may be, or even if it's, having the ability to connect to other servers, if it, needs to be added into an additional, what we call a stack of servers. Then you've got into the reliability aspect. Obviously, that is from a lifetime stance of when you have a server. If you're going with a server that might be a refurbished unit from a couple years ago, keep in mind that that hardware was designed for, and programs and applications a couple years ago, that's what they would run on. Well, now you're in the future of that system's lifetime. So you've already taken off, that piece of the lifetime out of that system. And then the availability. So whether it's having access to data in a very easy sense of way that, not only is it secure, but you can get access to it, to the actual physical data itself, that, the drives, to the actual virtual data themselves whenever you're looking at everything within your network. And then lastly, which I think is a big piece that a lot of people don't think about, is the service and support aspect. That piece there can help really expand upon the reliability of a server and the lifetime that you're getting out of that device, so that your return on your investment is much greater. If you're able to have a team in place, whether it's your own IT team or even utilizing the teams that we have here at our end, that can maintain and make sure that the server is running at its optimal level. There's nothing, you don't have a drive that's gone bad and it's not even working properly. Those are many things to keep in mind whenever you're thinking about a server. The other question that I hear a lot about is, why should I have a server? I'm a sole proprietor, or I've got 2 employees. Why would I have a server myself? Really, the 5 points here that I have are really, any one of them would be a reason, in my opinion, to have a server in place. So if you are sharing any sort of data, especially with the work from home environment, not everyone can be in the office and be connected to the network. A server would allow you and your employees to share data with each other through your network in the office through the VPN, which I'll discuss a little bit more about that later on. The next piece is if you need to have applications and resources available to your employees. So, and it kind of touches into the next topic as well there. If you're using Revit or using AutoCAD and you've got two designers that are working on different projects, but they work on all the same projects at the same time, or you need to view that project as well, a server can give you that ability to not only share those drawings with each other, but also share the applications. So whenever you are working on one project, another person can be working on that same project collaboratively, which then in turn increases productivity on that. The other piece, and this is very specific as well to any architecture firm, because I know the resources that are required for AutoCAD and Revit to run do demand a lot of processing power to actually run those projects, get the drawings up, whether it's 2D or 3D drawings that you're working on. They require a lot through that piece of software. And the server itself can provide that much more than what a laptop or a desktop would be able to. That, and it has, if done right, it has the ability to scale up as well. The other big piece is going to be if you're handling any sensitive data that you need to have restrictions on or set specific permissions for certain employees. That way it's not on their specific device, because kind of touching back a little bit on what Chris spoke about earlier, is if you have a single person or a single device that is your single point of failure, if they've, your finance person has all your financial documents for your business on their laptop, what happens if they are going out to the grocery store and leave their laptop in the car and their car gets broken into? All of your financial information is sitting on that one device. Or if that drive gets wiped from a virus or something. I mean, those are things that are real life scenarios that can happen. I've seen and talked with people before that have had these issues occur. So I know it does happen. And those are things to also think about so that you don't have a single point of failure. And that's really what a server can help protect you from. The other piece is if you're going to be hosting a web server as well. So for your own website, you would want to have a server in place to be able to support that website. And all of this really ties in with a secure infrastructure and having your firewall in place on your network with your VPN. Those will be things, like I said, I'm going to touch base a little bit more on here shortly. The other kind of thing that I hear about a lot is the difference between my on-premise or in-house server versus going with a cloud service. So that might be a company that you pay X number of dollars per month or per year, and they essentially have a cloud that you can get access to either store your data, your files, your applications can run on them. And a couple examples of that might be like Amazon Web Services or through Microsoft's OneDrive. Those are things that I know a lot of small to medium businesses use on a daily basis to either act as a server or store their data. Those clouds do offer some flexibility and can work well for unpredictable workloads, because if you all of a sudden get 3 projects in and your server's overwhelmed, and it can't handle that much all at once, an actual cloud application where it can actually ramp up because they have that infrastructure in place to handle that can kind of alleviate some of that. Now, the biggest difference, though, that a lot of people don't realize is from a cost perspective. If you have your server acting as a file share server over 8-10 years, an on-premise server is going to be much more cost effective than paying a cloud service every month or every year, hundreds if not thousands of dollars to store all that data, especially whenever you start looking at larger file sizes, because I know a lot of cloud services if you're doing it more of a file share type setup, the costs associated with that are on a per gig or per terabyte size. So as you start adding in projects to store within the cloud, that's going to increase your costs with that, because I know many projects are not, a small Word document or a small PowerPoint. They're gigs in size because they might be 3D renderings. Those take up a lot of storage, and like I said, can turn into a much higher cost over the long run. The other benefit to having a server in-house allows you to have much more control over your infrastructure, over your network. It allows you to make sure your data is more secure because you are the one that's handling your security aspect. All of that is through the use of a firewall and a VPN, or a virtual private network. And really the best way I like to describe a firewall is, think of it kind of like as a true wall, or a gatekeeper in that sense. When you have your data coming in, and this is a network web that I'm going to go over here to kind of explain it a little bit more from a visual perspective. There on the far left, you've got your internet that's coming in from your internet service provider. That's who you pay, your monthly bill to for your internet. The way that it should be set up in a perfect sense is, you have your internet coming in. You might have your modem or your cable box, whatever it is where you're getting your internet connection through, should then connect directly to your firewall. And your firewall, like I said, is your gatekeeper. So anything coming in and anything going out is maintained and protected through that firewall, so that nothing malicious or, even through a phishing email could come through. In some cases with certain firewall devices, they have the capabilities of doing that. And then that's going to be your single point of protection, in my opinion, for your network, on top of obviously your antivirus software that you would have on your own devices. That is going to really protect anything that's coming in that shouldn't be. Then next, you're going to have, which is going to be your switch. And your switch can act, really think of it as a divider of when your internet's coming through. Everything connects to the switch. And I know in this graph here, just as an example here, so your server, your desktop, and your laptop are all connecting through that switch. Through the switch, the desktop and your laptop can connect to the server. So the desktops and the laptops themselves aren't physically connected to the server itself, the device, whatever it may be. They're going through the switch. The switch is kind of like the police officer that might be directing traffic, or your stoplight that's making sure that certain traffic is going certain directions. All of that, once again, is then protected through your firewall. Your firewall also then can act as your VPN, which in this case here, this entire graph, you would consider as your VPN, your private network. To set that up through the firewall, there are almost every single firewall out there nowadays allows you through the device itself to actually set up a VPN. Everyone at Dell, ourselves, we connect in through a VPN every morning, and it allows for another piece of security, especially from a remote work standpoint. So just kind of as an example, every morning when I come to my laptop to log in, I can turn it on, use everything perfectly fine, but if I want to connect and access anything internally through my Dell side, I actually have to log in through our VPN side, and I have to enter in a secure token, and I'll actually kind of show this here on screen. It is a passcode that I have to enter in each time, and it puts out a randomly generated number, and I have to enter in that number on screen. And that's actually through a company called RSA. And that is kind of like a two-factor authentication. So like if you might use your thumbprint on your phone or through your laptop with Windows Hello, where it can use facial recognition to log you in, no one could log in with my username, even if they had my password, to the Dell network without that key. So they would have to get through somehow, some way, understand what that personalized key is, which it's not anywhere. The only place it's at is in my head. And that's how I get access to the Dell network. All of that really in turns then allows you to utilize the virtual private network that you can set up, which then secures your entire network as a whole, so that no one from the outside can just access your server, your desktops, your laptops without connecting in through that VPN connection. The other kind of big piece with a server itself, though, and this is one of the bigger aspects whenever you are looking at any server, even if it's one that you have now, because with all the changes that have gone on, is from a licensing perspective. I even have conversations with IT professionals on a weekly basis about this whole aspect of the licensing. Just like your laptop or your desktop, your server has an operating system as well. Now, what many people think is just whenever you were to go out and buy a laptop, when you get that laptop, you are expecting it to come with an operating system already loaded onto it. With the server, it's a little bit different, because with the many different aspects of what you can do on a server, that operating system doesn't come already loaded. That's something that you actually have to purchase separately. There's also other operating systems out there, not just Microsoft. There's a Linux operating system. There's many different ones out there that can be utilized in how you set up and are operating on your server. The key thing that I like to point out within the server licensing for Microsoft, because it's a big miss a lot of times, is not only do you have to have the standard license that you have to purchase separately, but you also have to have something in addition to that, what they call our CALs, or client access licenses. Those are licenses that you have to have for each individual employee in order to access the server under Microsoft's agreement that is essentially you're accepting when you log in and set up the actual server by installing the operating system. It's all in that fine print that no one ever really reads. The biggest thing that affects businesses with that is they don't know, and it's not usually told that they have to buy this, and they don't actually have to have those licenses for their employees to connect to the server. In my opinion, I like to kind of describe it as almost like a hall pass. If, back to whenever you were, in grade school or something, you had to go to the bathroom, the teacher would say you have to have a hall pass to go to the bathroom. Obviously, you don't physically have to have that hall pass to go to the bathroom, but you're required to take it with you to show that you have permission to go to the bathroom. The same sense kind of applies with these licenses. And if you don't have these licenses, which Microsoft does do checks through audits, which they have the ability to do so through their agreement, they will actually check to see if you have the correct number of licenses there. So if you, say, for example, have 10 employees, but you only have 2 CALs, you're missing now 8 CALs there. And depending upon how Microsoft wants to ask, or if you say, oh yeah, I'll take care of it and I'll get those CALs, but you never do, and they follow up and check, Microsoft can actually fine a business up to $100,000 per violation. And a single violation is missing just 1 CAL. So for 8 licenses missing there from that example, you could be looking up to about $800,000 there in fines from Microsoft. And through their agreements, they have technically the right to do that. The other piece with it as well that has greatly impacted since this change in remote work is not only do you have those licenses there, and those are for local use, so if you're in the office directly connected to the network, there's also the remote desktop licenses as well that you have to have if someone is accessing a server remotely. So like myself right now, or anyone else that's at home right now, if you're accessing a server or your server that's in your office, you have to have that remote desktop license as well. And the same thing applies for that as the other ones. If, everyone beforehand was working in the office and you had 10 employees and then they just, are now all working from home, but you didn't get the licensing there to support that. Microsoft has, even through these times, has been going through and auditing people for that specifically, because they know many businesses are not, used to their entire workforce working remotely. And they are making sure that people are having those licenses there to support that. Now, in all actuality, when you're looking at many of the questions that I get, they typically revolve around how, I've got a desktop in here that's acting as my server. Why don't I just use, another desktop like that? Well, the main reason why you don't want to do that is not only from a performance aspect, but also from a design aspect. With a design aspect, a desktop wasn't designed to be used as a server where a server is used 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's constantly running. A desktop's not really designed to do that. And the best example I like to give for that is, a desktop might be able to get the job done, but a pickup truck could do an 18-wheeler's job, but not for very long. It's going to give out. The other piece to that is with the server, you are going to have the ability to have what we call as redundancy. So that's going to be either redundancy in your processors, redundancy in your power supplies, or in your hard drives. And the redundancy aspect is there in place in case of failure. So if a power supply, which they do go out, if a power supply goes bad and it just stops working, another power supply is there in place so that it can automatically kick on and continue and make sure the server is still to run. Because the worst thing that you can have happen for a server, especially if it's in the middle of the day when everybody's using it, is all of a sudden you have a sudden loss of power, because all of that data that was either being put onto the server, whether it's being saved or someone's pulling data, taking a file off or a project, that sudden loss of power can corrupt that data. So where if you were to get the actual server back up and running, you try to access that file, it's not going to open because that data has now been corrupted. And that's typically why I also recommend, in addition to a server, having an external power supply, that if in the event of it losing power from the wall, it has a battery in there to maintain enough power for that server to be softly shut down. The other aspect is when you're looking at it from a hard drive standpoint. If you've got multiple drives and what they call are arrays or redundant array of independent disks, different sets can actually have different settings on a drive, where the most common you would see is a RAID 1, where it's 2 drives that are exact mirrors of each other. So in case of one drive failing, you have an exact copy of the other. So you're not losing all of your data. You're not having all of your eggs sitting in one basket with all of your data that resides in that server. And those are things with a desktop that you just don't have the ability or the capability to really do in some cases, because there might not be enough space within that desktop, or it might not have the proper hardware to do that. And the other kind of considerations to keep in mind when you are looking to make a server part of your business is, especially right now with the work from home environment, having a server that's in place and is robust enough to handle everyone accessing a server remotely. And then, having the storage capacity to store all of their data, and having that processing power, like I said, to do all of that. Even if you are having a server in place that is going to be for your designers to share and work on projects together. Having your business primed for growth, like I said in the very beginning, is usually the best thing to have that forward thinking on. Whether it's maybe I have a rack server or a larger tower server that I can add in more drives later. Like I said, the biggest thing that you don't want to have happen is you are using a server for maybe 1, 2, 3 years, and you're now at your full capacity on your storage, and you don't have any more room to put more drives, because then either you have to look at another device that's separate from your server, or potentially looking at a new server at that point. The rack servers themselves, because they're so compact, they allow for you to actually stack additional servers on top of each other, so that you can implement another server that is either specific for storage, and then you can offload it to another server where it's just running your applications, or even running to a web server, whatever it may be. You have the ability to do that with the rack servers. The other major piece, obviously, behind all of this is the security aspect. You're going to be able to maintain the security within your network. You'll maintain your data, and you'll be able to make sure that you're setting the proper credentials for your employees, so that not everyone is accessing the same data as, maybe your person in HR or within finance. That will give you all of the capabilities to do that, and allow you to work remotely, whether you're from home or across the country. You'll be able to work on your projects and access your data. But with that, I just wanted to also extend out, I've got my contact information here. It's also going to be available as well to any of y'all. If y'all have any questions, even after this, feel free to shoot me over an email. I would be more than happy to discuss any of this with y'all any further. I can even get you in contact with a tech advisor that would be dedicated for you as a single point of contact here at Dell, so that if you've got questions about servers, storage, networking, laptops, desktops, you name it, that's what they're there for, as a single point of contact for you, and anyone that's a part of the BSA or AIA. With that, I would like to open up the floor for any questions that anyone may have.
Thank you, Christian. That was very helpful. Fantastic. If anybody has questions, you can just unmute yourself and chime in.
I know Catherine had posted a question there. Sometimes for rendering, a server farm is used. Is it possible to have a dedicated server off premises? So yes, and that is something too that you can have set up. And it kind of touches base with what Chris had said earlier, because with, even with having a server, you want to have a backup plan in place where it's something that you can take with you off premise. You can have a dedicated server off premise. That's where the network, the virtual private network, comes into place. We actually have servers themselves that are built and have hardware capabilities that are for, if you have higher amounts of rendering that you have to do, with, higher performing graphics cards. It gives you the ability to have larger hard drives in there, higher performing processors, and higher amount of RAM than what you would typically have in a desktop or a laptop. But like right now, for myself, I'm obviously working from home. All of our servers are off-site, and everything that they're doing, is going to be off-site in another facility. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have a server farm. It might just mean that you have a single server, a single device, to do all of that. Were there any other questions anyone else had?
I had a question about VPNs.
Mhm.
Other offices I've worked at before, maybe this has improved in, it's been a few years now since I've used a VPN, but it's been often very slow to the point where, like, try and do Revit or something like that is a bit painful.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering, what are some things that make VPN slow? Is that still an issue today?
Yeah, so I mean that's a fantastic question, because
weird workarounds that people use that then seem to create more problems.
yeah, so the biggest thing was, whenever you're looking at that, when you're seeing that lag, especially if you're working remotely, the key thing that you want to look at is that's internet connection right there. So that's not, it may not necessarily be a hardware aspect, It could potentially be either the internet connection that you're using when you're at home, or if you're in the office. If you know that, say you have, because you also have to think about it in the office with everyone else connecting to it. If you are paying for 100 megs download and, you know, whatever the amount is upload, because it varies between internet service providers. But if you're looking at 100 meg download, that again gets broken out to everyone that is also accessing remotely. So if you've got, you know, say 5, 10 other people that are also accessing that server at that same time, they're kind of taking chunks out of that pie from the internet. So that's where your business internet connection can also cause a quote unquote lag in performance that you might be seeing from your VPN side. Now, if you are in the office and you are still seeing that lag, then the next piece that you look at is your hardware, because obviously you kind of follow up in that chain that I had that picture of, and I'll actually go back here to that. So in this this web here, if you're in the office and you're noticing that lag, that's when I would take a look at that switch, because if your switch might be 8, 10 years old, it might only have the capabilities of doing, you know, 10, 20, 50 megabits, whereas your internet is 100. You know, you just now have created yourself a bottleneck at that point. And so those are things to also look at, as well as it can happen on your server as well. The network cards that go in the server that then connect to the switch can have that same issue as the switch. And those are the two major things that I see that can lead to what you might see as lag on your end whenever you're working on something. I know, DJ, you had asked about, yes, so I know the presentation itself will be recorded so that you can go back and see everything else there that Chris had talked about earlier on. I know anything is always better whenever you're looking at, if you see a problem, whether it's, kind of what you're talking about earlier with the lag with the VPN, or if you are having an issue with a particular system, the best way to take a look at, finding a solution for it is either going up the chain in this web here, or if it's happening on a particular system, but it's not happening on another one, then obviously there's something going on with that system there. Those are just really quick and easy ways to identify problems and how to, potentially find the solution in fixing those. Are there any other questions anyone else had? These are all great questions, by the way. No question is a stupid question either. I'll put that out there.
I'll ask a stupid question. And given that we, in this time of working remotely, if you have a server and it's in your office space, what are some of the things that you need to think about in terms of maintaining that while no one is in the office? I've heard of some people keeping one staff member on site throughout this because they need to redo things to the server.
Yeah, and those are things that, I will say, if you are able to access, and typically from an administrator standpoint, you can access the server. I think Steve actually just put this as well, or it might be a separate question, but you can actually access a server remotely. That is more from maybe an IT administrative side. So we have a particular piece of hardware that ties in with a piece of software in place on our servers that allows you to access a server as if you were there, but you can do it remotely. So you can see, the health of a hard drive. You can see, the health of the just overall system itself, and seeing if there might be an issue with the server. Now, one thing, and kind of touches back on what I said before, some of the things that you can have in place, especially with everybody working remotely, is to have those redundancies in place. So having the, the separate power supply there. So if the building loses power all of a sudden, your server's just not shutting off all of a sudden. Now your data there has been corrupted. The other piece is, making sure that your data is being backed up, whether it's to an offsite cloud, which right now would probably be the best. You're not having someone there to physically go and do that backup on a physical device. But having those pieces in place can really help to make sure that, you don't necessarily have to have someone there physically in the office, to make sure that that is still operating at normal capacity. And then I know, Steve, you had said, is a remote access to a running workstation in the office secure? This seems to get rid of the speed issue. So were you talking about particularly if you might be using like a program like LogMeIn, where you're accessing, you have a desktop that's in the office that is, you are then connecting through another device through that application?
Yes, I've done it two ways. One was working through the Microsoft Remote Access program, and the other I've done through, well, one of the, a third-party remote access program. I've forgotten the name. Which one right now?
Yeah, like I know a pretty common one is LogMeIn, and I know some people that do that as well. The main reason why I would say, I mean, it is secure and it's not secure in that sense, because number one, you're connecting through that system that is separate of your firewall. Yes, your system that you're working on is connected to the firewall that's in the office, but your system at home is not. And it's connecting to that device. And that connection can then, it basically acts as a tunnel around your firewall. Because in order to access that system in your office remotely like that, you have to obviously tell your firewall that, hey, this is me connecting in. It's okay for me to be connecting in. But essentially what you've just done is you've opened a hole in your firewall, because now anything that happens on your computer, even if it's a malicious virus or something that you may not even know is there, it can get sent over to that device and infect your network at that point, because it's essentially gone all the way around the firewall. And so that's typically where I say having everything going through the VPN is the most secure, because your firewall is going to filter all of that.
Are there any VPNs that allow you to work through them, or is there a way to make remote access work through the VPN?
Yeah. So the well, I mean, not directly in the sense that you were talking about there, because, like I said, in order to access that system remotely in that sense, because the system sees that the system that's in-house, and you're coming in as an outside, quote unquote, connection, and you're wanting to connect to that specific device. The connection, whenever you do that, you basically create what they call as a tunnel through to that device, and it goes through the firewall. And like I said, it creates a hole or a gap there through your firewall. In order to go through your firewall from a remote stance, that's where you're not connecting to a device there that's in the office. You're using your device, just like I am now with my laptop. I'm connected through the VPN to gain access to the server from my device, and not through a device that's in the office. Does that help better answer the question there, Steve?
Well, I'm not quite sure I understand the difference, or maybe I'm looking for a second VPN connection to the workstation. And you're saying that those two can't happen because they breach each other?
if you're going through a system that you have at home and you're connecting to another system that's physically in the office, that connection there goes through your firewall. Your firewall is not picking up anything between that connection, as if you were using that system in the office, though, because then that system in the office has to go out through the firewall. What you're doing now is you've basically gone around the firewall. So I can actually I can actually annotate it here, I believe. Let me see. Nope, that's not what I want. So say we've got, if you can see on the screen, I will change that. So say you've got your system here, and this is at home, and pardon my drawing. So this is your system at home, and say this is the system that you want to connect to in the office. Typically, your system in the office, if you're using that actually physically in the office, it connects to the switch, which if you're going out to the internet, it has to go to the firewall, and then it goes out to the internet. All of that happens very, very quickly. Same thing happens if you want to access the server. If you're on that device, you go to the switch and it goes to the server. Now, what you're wanting to do is using the system at home. When you're coming in, you're essentially coming in through the internet is how it's going to see it. But with the firewall is going to stop you there and say, hey, you're an outside connection. I don't recognize you. Why are you trying to connect to this? And the information that you would need to access that system, you would then enter it in. And what it does is it essentially goes around that firewall and connects directly through to this system here. So you've essentially circumnavigated all of the firewall, the switch, all of that to then access this system here. And then when you take remote control over that system, it is then, if you need to access the server, it goes the same path. It goes to the switch to then to the server. The problem is, though, is that connection right along here, from you going around the firewall to directly to the laptop, you're not protected from the firewall itself when you do that, because you've created that, and this is why they call it a tunnel, because you've tunneled down in the network or the web. It's down under the firewall. And so that's why, one of the reasons why they call it a tunnel, because you've tunneled now under the firewall and are now up to the actual device that you're working on.
Okay, I guess the answer basically to my question would be no, that there aren't any remote access tools that allow you to go through the firewall the proper way.
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, not that I'm aware of, no. The only safe way that I know to remotely access a server is that you have your device at home that is then connecting in through a VPN license that's set up through your firewall. It goes to the firewall, then it goes to the switch, and then it goes to your server. And it's protected through the firewall, that connection is.
Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. It was a great question too, because that's sometimes a lot of the things that I hear about what businesses do, and it can open you up for a security risk. Were there any other questions that anyone else had? These have all been really great questions too, by the way. Nope. Well, I think that's all that I have for y'all. Obviously, like I said before, if anyone has any questions or any comments that they'd like, feel free to reach out to me. Be more than happy to assist and answer any questions that you may have after this. My email's there. My first name, Christian_Mims, which is my last name, at Dell.com. And I'd be more than happy to sit down and have a conversation with you one-on-one. Other than that, I do appreciate y'all's time. And I appreciate Kristen and Christina there for having me, and Chris as well, to join in and talk with y'all today about how we can help make your network and your business more secure and more successful.
Thank you so much, Christian.
No problem. Y'all have a good rest of your day.
Thank you very much.
You too. Bye.